Welcome to the SHOWstudio Fashion Film Awards in collaboration with QIC Global Real Estate. The SHOWstudio Fashion Film Awards is something that Nick has wanted to do for a very long time, as I think everyone who's ever sort of worked with Nick or even like had 2-minute conversation with Nick knows he's a big fan of fashion film, and he's always wanting to sort of, you know, promote it as a medium and search for new talent. One of the things that we were really excited about with this award was how sort of wide the brief was. All we really asked was that people submitted a film between 15 seconds and 5 minutes long. And part of the reason we wanted to do that was to kind of echo the diversity of film that you see on SHOWstudio. I'm sure you all know SHOWstudio was founded in 2000 by Nick. It was kind of, you know, it was really pre-YouTube, it was pre-social media, so it really was very, you know, it's always said innovative when people talk about SHOWstudio, but it really, really was. And you know, the central reason that Nick founded it was the possibilities of film and moving image as a way of presenting fashion. And part of that is, you know, looking at moving image can be anything from sort of a few seconds, it could be a GIF, right through to a sort of beautiful 10-minute study that sort of is the result of a 3-day shoot with a stylist and countless models and a whole glam team. And, you know, fashion film is incredibly diverse because of that. And that really has been reflected in the submissions we received. Some of them were filmed on mobile phones. Others were used really exciting new technologies like 3D scanning. We're going to be talking a little bit today about kind of fashion film then, now, and the future, which kind of encompasses that diversity. I've got a great set of panellists with me. Firstly, I've got Nick, director of SHOWstudio.
Thank you very much.
And my boss, so I have to be really nice to him. So he gets the easy questions. Nick was obviously also one of the judges for the award, and sat next to him is Gareth Pugh, an amazing fashion designer, who also was a judge. You're feeling really good about yourself. I've also got Natalie Khan. It's amazing to join us because, Natalie, you're like the most knowledgeable person I know about fashion film. You're a fashion historian, a huge, huge knowledge on this area, so it's amazing that you're here. And then there's Dan. No, I'm kidding. And then there's Dan Thorley, an amazing fashion journalist. And Dan is obviously the editor-in-chief of A Magazine, curated by an amazing fashion commentator, so sees kind of fashion film, I guess, out in the wild in a way, because you see it out at the fashion shows, the way it's used as part of installations, as well as kind of, you know, when brands are working with it as an advertising tool, so super exciting. I'll jump right in, because we don't have much time for the panel. I'm Lou, by the way. I'm Lou, I edit SHOWstudio. Hi! I just wanted a clap. So I'm going to begin. So Nick, I was kind of talking a lot when I began about fashion film and the diversity of it as a medium, and just I want to understand kind of your motivations for setting up SHOWstudio. Was kind of the possibilities of moving image one of the things that drew you to sort of setting up online?
Yes, in part. Well, I used to film all my shoots. So from right back to 1987, I think I started. I put a camera on a tripod at the back of the studio and just tell everybody I was filming it. And just film everything, sort of fly on the wall style. And I sort of noticed sometimes I look back through the films and I thought, well, the lighting I used for photographs sort of works okay for the film as well. So I thought, well, this seems interesting. And of course, in 1987, there was nowhere to put a fashion film. It wasn't, you know, there's no platform for fashion film in 1987. There's only really cinema, which is sort of hopelessly out of time, sort of cycle-wise. It's just a film takes about 3 years to put together. Or television, and television never really sort of rose to the challenge. It was never, for some reason, you know, Vogue TV never took off, and there was no sort of, I think television was too bothered about sort of chasing the ratings and highly bureaucratic at that point. So I noticed that all these, you know, it was actually, you could film just as easily. And so I think it was the access and the sort of ease of access to making a film that drew me towards it. I sort of felt that, you know, film always seemed to be very complicated. And actually I couldn't work out why it was so complicated. I did an ad for Christian Dior, kind of mid-90s, I think. And there was 70 people as a crew. I'm thinking, I don't need 70 people. I could light Charlize Theron with one light. Why do I need 6 other people holding lights and moving things around? So I think it was the accessibility of fashion film that drew me to it. And the realization that if a fashion designer makes a piece of clothing, it can't ever be seen, the fashion designer can never imagine it's just to be seen as a still image. It must, you know, fashion designers must always create a garment to be seen in movement of that idea. So I thought, well, it probably sort of follows a sort of function of it more to actually then make a fashion film, which is kind of strange because obviously my career had been in fashion photography, so I've been making still images, and that's where I earned my money and everything else. But it just became more and more frustrating to me that there was really no sort of outlet for fashion film. And I sort of thought, well, how did fashion photography start? Sorry, I'll stop this monologue. You can ask me else another question.
No, I'm not looking at my watch for that.
But I thought,
before.
how did fashion photography get going? And it was, replacing fashion illustration. Condé Nast, okay, I don't want fashion illustration in my magazine. I want this new medium of fashion photography. So I thought, well, perhaps SHOWstudio should be, have that role and be the platform to usher in this new medium of fashion film. So that was sort of some of the reasons it appealed to me.
It's interesting, though, to hear you say that, because I think, and I've noticed it particularly when people kind of interview you or write about you or write about SHOWstudio, people they always use the word innovative, and they talk about fashion film like it's a kind of super new medium, which I find quite interesting, because in some ways it is. SHOWstudio was pioneering when it kind of began promoting fashion film. But if you look back, all the great image makers have in some ways engaged or experimented with moving image. On SHOWstudio, we've got archive footage from Owen Blumenfeld and Guy Bourdin, and you can see countless other examples, Avedon, Newton, and who've all kind of engaged with filming fashion, as you say, getting these garments in motion. And I'm going to go to you, Natalie, as our history expert. But can you just give us a bit of an idea about kind of the foundations of fashion film?
Well, fashion film has existed ever since there has been fashion photography as well. I think technology has driven the symbolic production of fashion, the way that we look at fashion through images. And technology has always informed the way that we experience the world and has always driven the commercial image. And fashion is about the new, so it always engages with innovation and progress. And yes, as you say, those examples, Erwin Blumenfeld, Guy Bourdin, these are photographers who experimented with film and the moving image. And these are beautiful examples. But I think in my writing, in the way that I try and make sense of fashion film, the way that we experience it now, the way that we see it around us, see it grow all the time, is really also about the impact of the digital on the fashion image. And every new form of technology is informed by what has existed before. So that's very important. So fashion film can never be seen as entirely new because it has to reference what exists already. And so it references film, it references photography, and it references other sort of filmic formats, other genre. But I think in its own way, it really is something that is not film, and it's not photography. And I think fashion film is almost a limit, there's limits to that term and how we can understand it. I think it's something other than that. I mean, some people just call it promotional film because we are dealing with commercial images. But yes, it is certainly a growing format that is characterized through a particular lightness. And also the immersive image is important to think of it, because fashion film now is different to Guy Bourdin's examples, for example, because the viewer engages with the image, and that's different now. We immerse in the image as much as the image speaks to us. So that I think, to me, sort of characterizes fashion film now.
Perhaps that's why today it's a little bit more exciting, because people have stretched beyond those boundaries of it being something related to product and actually pushing fashion film completely outside of that box and that commerciality, which has made it something a lot more artistic today. And there's people that are treating clothing and the fashion product in an entirely not necessarily cinematic way, but perhaps taking it in a more raw way and referencing all different parts of cinematic and avant-garde history, rather than just going to that very Hollywoodian aesthetic.
Nick, you were nodding through a lot of things that were said there.
Yeah.
Have you looked back at kind of, I think it's interesting what you said with fashion film, it's not film and it's not photography, and I think that is kind of how you operate. Whenever I talk to you, you talk about kind of how you're an image maker and that kind of struggle of defining yourself. And would you agree that kind of it's not like what Guy Bourdin did, but it's also not photography?
I think fashion films are sort of slightly suffered from the name film, to be honest, because I think it pushes a lot of people towards looking at film as a genre. And I believe personally that fashion film is much more to the language of fashion and photography than it does to the language of film. I think we've had, as you said, sort of 550 plus entries to this. And a lot of those entries didn't seem to be able to quite divorce themselves from the language of cinema. And I think very firmly, or I believe very firmly, that fashion film should divorce itself. And it shouldn't be anything to do with that. It should grow from the language of fashion photography. So if you take Richard Avedon's fantastic pictures of Verushka jumping across the sort of grey background, if you had 4 more frames of that, then you have a fashion film, you have an animated GIF, you have fashion in movement. And really fashion film is just closed in movement, really. So I think, and I've tried very hard to, in the brief to the people who enter this competition, say, I don't want you to mimic cinema. This isn't about that. This is about making clothes move. Follow the narrative that's in the piece of clothing. Don't put another narrative on top of it. Otherwise it becomes a film with fashion in it, and that's a very different thing. So I think I think fashion film has to define itself as that, and I very firmly believe that a narrative is a sort of a storytelling narrative, as you would see in a normal film, probably isn't what's needed in fashion film. It really has to be the sort of the language that makes you desire that piece of clothing. I mean, the thing you come away from a great fashion photograph is a desire to either have that piece of clothing, be with that person, have that hairstyle, whatever it is, but you desire the thing in it. That's the purpose of a great fashion photograph, and a great fashion film should do exactly that. It should make you say, oh, well, I want that jacket, or I want that coat. Beyond that, it shouldn't fall into sort of Hollywood-like storytelling of kind of I mean, we're taking the Avedon Verushka example. We've all seen that picture of her jumping across the grey background. You don't know where she's been, where she's coming from, where she's going to go, and you don't really care. It's just that instant desire you have to be that person or to want the clothes or whatever it is. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that did. That was very good. Before we move on, while we're talking about history, you were telling me an amazing anecdote when we were backstage about Dali and the board.
Van Ray.
Can you repeat that? It was really nice.
Oh, we were just talking about the fact that film and fashion has, as we were talking about, that sort of interaction with people, and the fact that it's something that goes 2 ways. And I was speaking about the fact that at the Bal Blanc, the white ball, which was in the... I'm going to get the decade wrong, but Man Ray was a co-host of the White Ball, and what they actually did at this ball, one of the famous Parisian balls, was they actually invited all the guests to dress in white, and it was a white room, and then he actually projected a film over the guests, so in a way they actually became the canvas of the evening, and it was a very sort of immersive experience. And it links in with, I think, what Lou will be talking about next, is the fact that fashion film has also become kind of, at times, a quintessential part of the fashion show experience too.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's kind of where I want to go to you, Gareth. It's also interesting, given what Nick was just saying about fashion films not having narratives, because I think I've watched pretty much all of your fashion films, and they don't have narratives kind of ever, which is something like that. There's moments where you wonder what the story is. But I want to just kind of go back and ask you, what made you first engage with the medium? Because when people talk about designers who've championed film, they always refer to you, and I think you've done it in really interesting ways, because firstly, you tend to always collaborate with Ruth Hogburn, who's an amazing fashion filmmaker, so there's clearly a really amazing creative relationship there. But also, you've used fashion film, sometimes instead of the catwalk, sometimes alongside the catwalk, sometimes kind of separate from the catwalk, but as a part of your show. And what to you is so exciting about the possibilities of the medium?
I mean, for me, initially when I first, I met Ruth through Nick, and I first worked with Ruth just after she left being Nick's first assistant. Is that correct? Yep. So it was kind of thrown her in the deep end, because it was an idea to replace a whole show at Paris Fashion Week with a film.
Didn't you lie to them?
We told so many lies. Because my thing with the Chambre Syndicale was, there's a main schedule of shows and their catwalk shows. You kind of know what you're getting, and then there's a subsidiary column on the schedule where it's presentations. I didn't want to be listed as a presentation. I felt what we were doing was interesting and important enough for it to still maintain that kind of momentum of being listed as a show. So yeah, there was a lot of white lies told, but the Chambre Syndicale are very kind of into that idea of pushing things forward, and they didn't complain, and there was no love lost. But basically the idea of doing a film, it was, I don't know, it's like when you do shows and you do them every season, you can kind of become somewhat disillusioned, or a little, like, bored's not the right word, but it's kind of for me, when I moved from, I showed in London for quite a few seasons, then moved to Paris, and it's kind of, sometimes it's very necessary to go out of your comfort zone. And for me, going that far on that platform, because Paris is such a big platform, to kind of change the way we presented the whole thing, it was kind of readdressing the whole context in which people saw your work, was actually it was kind of quite a natural decision, but looking back, I think it was quite, it was kind of quite wild. But it kind of worked out, and, you know, like, it was something that I just felt very naturally it was kind of something that I didn't really have to question. And my relationship with Ruth's grown a lot throughout the years, but I think it just was something that she was very attuned to, because it was, I know, something that she did a lot with Nick, and making the filming of the shoot into film and things like that. And it's something that we didn't really question it a lot. And it was kind of, it just felt very natural. It just kind of felt necessary for us to do it. So we did it. For a fashion designer and for someone who's a Virgo, it's the idea of regaining that idea of control. And when you send a girl out onto a runway, it's like, if she trips or if she blinks at the wrong time, the photographer takes a picture at the wrong moment, you know, that defines your work for that season. And it goes through so many different filters that aren't at your disposal, that are other people's decisions, that informs what other people, a wider audience, see of your work. Whereas being able to do a film with someone like Ruth, who's got such a great eye and such a great sort of sensitivity to what you want to project, and to also, you know, whenever we do a film, we also shoot our own lookbook. And we do that so far in advance that we're so able to edit and refine and retouch, and sort of just everything's perfect when we release it, that it gives me such a sense of satisfaction as a Virgo.
One of my favourite stories that Gareth has ever told me is when he did that first season where you did the film, he told me that when people came into the show space, they were like running to find the backstage area, and you were like, there's no backstage, it's the film. And they were like desperately looking for like a model to get a picture of, which is quite funny. But it's interesting what you talked about there, because you kind of touched on this idea of the digital space, and I think fashion has always treated that like it's this kind of wild area, like they have no control over. So they do these catwalk shows, and then they're documented by kind of the blurry Instagrams of those in attendance. But what's interesting about something like film and moving images, it does give you a chance to kind of control your image. And I think personally that the first thing that's kind of really made people engage with that is things like, you know, moving image with something like Instagram, or particularly, you know, we were talking about it again backstage, but also, you know, behind the scenes footage. It's another thing that has made kind of the wider fashion community accept film as something. You know, before it was kind of this niche thing that you maybe experimented with, but now, you know, if you go on the website or the social media accounts of any huge brand, they're engaging with moving image in some way. And I'm just interested to get your opinions on that, particularly having just attended the men's shows. What's your take on the way that brands are using moving image in this kind of semi-commercial, semi-creative way?
Well, it's been important for a long time, and different people have used it in different ways, all the way back to when people like Martin Margiela was staging men's presentations, where you would walk in and there was a fake runway with men walking past on a film that they'd created a few weeks before. And Hussein Chalayan, of course, was also using fashion in film in the 90s and the early noughties. But today it's become somewhat crucial to the big budget side of what the fashion show platform has become. It's become an extravaganza, and menswear, women's wear, everyone is trying to use it the best of their ability to seem as the most in touch label, whether it's Burberry doing Snapchat and Gucci as well before their shows, which is also a way of sort of capturing the behind-the-scenes action, to when Louis Vuitton showed this sort of very Tron-like simulated show, simulated film as the background to their last show, which was again quite interesting, as it was a completely non-fashion film being shown in a fashion context. And I think that, in a way, for me, that's sometimes when it's the most successful, is when something transcends just being a film about the clothes and becomes more of a cultural and a social comment. I mean, Chris Van Ash has just shown his last Dioram show, and Willy van der Peer created a film of skaters, which was shown behind the runway, and the runway was covered in skate ramps that were all lined in red neon, and the models actually that were walking in the show actually skated in the film as well. So there was that kind of nice cohesion there. So I think it can be quite successful when people manage to make a real and authentic link with the aesthetic, with the people that are representing that aesthetic, and the experience for the viewer. So it's very difficult, but some people do it very well.
Well, it's interesting you talk about it being difficult, and I think it is a difficult relationship. A lot of times when people talk about film, they see it as kind of one of these news channels that's coming along and that is going to replace the catwalk. You know, people are kind of obsessed with whether, you know, Fashion Week will continue and what's the best way of showing fashion. And it's interesting to see that somehow, you know, sometimes film is combined, sometimes it's separate. You know, you just did the film for Tom Ford, which obviously kind of replaced his catwalk show, but then you see just as many examples of films being involved in Fashion Week. This is a big question, but do you guys think we will get to a point where most of Fashion Week does happen digitally via film, whether that is, you know, a live stream of the show or whether it's, you know, a specially made film? Because
well, I heard, and this is just purely rumour, but some of us may have seen and witnessed and lived through a Philip Plein show, and he is known for insane theatrics and flaming cars and models on the backs of motorbikes and all this kind of thing. And
it's very tasteful.
I do believe that he's quite interested in the idea of an entirely holographic show with no models at all. And of course, that's something that links back to what McQueen did with Kate Moss. But I think it's interesting to think of the idea that an entire runway show could be created and played out without a single model, and with the clothes actually becoming holograms.
The idea of a show, it's still a show. It's still. I think that's the thing with people who talk about fashion, who write about fashion, and watch fashion shows. It's that group mentality, or that thing of being invited and going and made to feel special, and kind of that whole like herding thing. It's kind of like, that's kind of quite important for fashion. It's kind of like it's kind of people feel like they're on the road and they're in a gang, and it's kind of, I don't know, it's like that mentality I think is very difficult to extinguish. And I think what you're talking about is the idea that people will just sit in their office and watch fashion film. It's like, where's the excitement really within that? I think it kind of needs to feel a little bit dangerous, and it's like, shit, I'm half an hour late for a show and I need to get on the other side of town. It's a bit of drama. It's like, that's kind of what Fashion Week is, and it's kind of ridiculous and insane. There's so much like travel and
but also exclusivity
as
well,
wasted, and hotel bills and expense accounts. But I think that's kind of, that's kind of the ab-fab sort of thing that a lot of people signed up to be in fashion for, don't lie. So it's very difficult to extinguish that. And whilst, I love fashion film and think it's a great platform, it's like whenever we've done a film to replace the catwalk show, we've always had a presentation where we invite people as if it's a show, because those people the opinion formers who you want to see it and want to see it first, and you want them to attend, the need to kind of have that sort of feeling of being a little bit special. It's kind of like we always do it, like, we rented like this huge space where McQueen used to show. It's like this massive sports stadium just to show a film. We could have just launched it as we did the hour after the show on SHOWstudio, but in order to give it the weight that it needed to compete with everything around it, you need to have that physical experience of going to a film premiere or going to a fashion show. It's kind of like pandering to the audience, I think. And I think that's the thing that is very difficult to get away from.
Yeah. But I really like, Gareth, what you're saying. Sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
No, what you're saying about that, the difference between the fashion show and the film, and that it should actually be the same thing. And I mean, to me, in my writing on fashion film, I always sort of say that we need to let go of this idea that fashion film is representation and the fashion show is reality, because I don't think there is a distinction. You know, they're both highly artificial images. One happens in the physical space and the other might be a film happening in the physical space, but they're still highly, you know, sort of worked on, they're created in a sense. So I don't think there is a difference between reality and image. Everything is, you know, it's the same thing. And I think we need to let go of that, especially within sort of social media as well, playing such an important role.
That Gareth was talking about as well is quite interesting, because if you really look at all of the view counts and the viral nature of fashion film that brands put out, it's not high. And I think that seeing it through that kind of that exclusive nature is still very, very important, because
the Tom Ford one was over 2 million hits in the first.
I mean, that's an absolute.
But that's because he teamed up with Gaga.
Yeah.
And that's what McQueen did in Plato's Atlantis, which I think was a genius thing, although we didn't know about it at the time. But still, and I think it's interesting you're talking about, you know, whether the fashion show goes on to become a spectacle in that way, where, you know, Tom Ford teamed up with Lady Gaga, therefore it went kind of through the roof.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm slightly undecided whether the show will go on as a spectacle and somewhere to go. There's a lot of lovely things like, you know, you're all physically coming here tonight, and that's quite special. But actually, you know, if we look at probably the future of fashion imagery, virtual models are almost certainly the thing you'll start to see next. You know, I 3D scan all my models. You know, we motion capture them. You know, we can put out a 3D walking version of Carly Kloss. You know, you don't have to have Carly Kloss anymore. And although it's a little bit clunky at the moment,
Lucky Carly.
Well, Carly might say, well, you know, not Carly, but somebody else a little older might say, you know, I'm turning 40, I don't want to be doing it anymore, but my image from 20 years ago, my 3D scan or whatever it is, you know, that can keep on going for me. So those sorts of things, you know, the high amount of production we put into creating imagery, we are virtually creating models, you know, creating virtual models in any case.
Yeah.
I think there's also a part of it is commerce. Although, you know, we love the spectacle, we love the going places, or love and hate the going places, and actually sort of, you know, the whole sort of circus of fashion in that way. But in the end, it'll be commerce that will decide. I mean, much true with the magazines. The magazines will go on if people keep putting advertising in them. If they don't, then they'll stop.
Yeah.
So these things, although they kind of seem nice, will actually, I think, only exist if they make financial sense. If suddenly somebody's selling a lot more by doing a fashion film and not doing a fashion show, and they're going through to 2 million people, and it's being all sold from the fashion film, and, you know, then that's the way it'll go.
Yeah.
So I think commerce, you know, fashion has always been supported by business, or is part of business. And so I think it is that to decide how much we like certain parts of it.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting also, I was glad you mentioned that McQueen show with the hologram, kind of especially because you were just talking about digital models, because that's another really interesting example of things that are seen as kind of really techy and futuristic, but actually quite old school, because everyone talks about that like it's a hologram. But it wasn't actually a hologram, it was Pepper's Ghost, which is like a Victorian technique of making a ghost. And that's what I love so much about moving image in fashion, is the way that it kind of, in some ways, can be seen as so techy and so modern, but it's actually so kind of, you know, old school in some ways. And you've kind of touched on it there, Nick, with the virtual models, but I wanted to talk about kind of some of the new technologies and ways that the medium is going to grow, because I think something that has come out of this is this idea of film as a kind of a leveler. You know, someone who doesn't live in Paris, New York, Milan or London can kind of engage with Fashion Week, can engage with, you know, the seasons by filming, and, you know, even if it's just on social media, and they can kind of put their collection out there. But a lot of that is happening because of new technologies, whether it's filming on your iPhone or using social media. And other things in particular that you've seen happen, you know, down to something as simple as Snapchat, through to sort of an amazing new camera or anything like that that's coming along that people are really excited about. What technologies are changing things? You're going to have to answer, Nick. No one.
Great. Everybody goes silent. I think Instagram is changing things. It's not really a new technology. It's, you know, it's a new platform.
Yeah.
I think the fashion film is yet defining itself, and part of the joy of doing this is to, you know, to help define fashion film. It's a new medium. It's sort of 15 years old, arguably, in its sort of present form. And I think, you know, it was, I don't know how long a fashion film is. Gareth has done incredible fashion films, which are absolutely sort of, you'll sit there from the start to the end, glued to them, and they're 12 minutes long. Some are films. Some are. Okay, so let's say 10 minutes long. But, you know, then a 15-second fashion film seems to be the currency now on Instagram, and Instagram's such a massive platform.
Yeah.
So is that what's going to define what a fashion film is? in the way that MTV defined as sort of a music video is 3 minutes long because it follows it up. It's not really, I think there's new technology, and I think part of, again, the pleasure of seeing the sort of all the entries to this is all the different technologies people used, and the ingenious way that they did. But I don't think there's one new piece of technology that's pushing things forward. I mean, there's the whole 3D scanning and all that, and what we talked about earlier about the virtual model, so that's super interesting. But I don't think there's one particular piece of technology that's pushing it. I mean, to be honest, I don't want to give them another bloody ad, but the iPhone is, it's pushed a lot because we can pick it up. I can pick it up here, and I can film in 4K. It's a fairly incredible piece of kit. Sure, Samsung does exactly the same thing, so Apple don't get all the praise.
And shout out to our friends at Virtus.
Yes, but mobile phones are pretty good, and they're what they do is pretty incredible right across the board.
All equal.
Yep.
What I think is, like, I remember quite a few years ago we had a conversation about, I'm not sure if you remember, but I certainly do, about live streaming one of my shows.
Yeah.
And the idea of, we didn't do it because it was cost prohibitive because we had to get an outside broadcast van, and it was kind of like a crazy setup to do it. And what I find, what I find the most exciting thing, which is kind of a shame, I mean, it kind of has been picked up by a lot of people, but it's not as big as Instagram yet, but something like Periscope, where you can have an iPhone or something else, I don't know, and open an app and literally live broadcast what is happening in front of you with your phone.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that also engages the audience who can be spread around the world back to the live element. It's not necessarily about something that exists online. It's about engaging those people with something that's actually happening. And it's kind of interesting that that's the thing that I think is, it's the most interesting thing that's happened for quite a long time. The idea that you can communicate with as many people as you have on Twitter via a live stream. It can also be quite dangerous, I'm sure.
So everybody here was Periscope.
Imagine bum calling people on Periscope, but
the live stream itself has become such an integral part of so many labels shows, and it really struck me. I think it was last year at Guesquier's Vuitton cruise show, which was in Monaco, sorry, and it was just in a beautiful glass space in front of the palace in Monaco, and we were all sat around these Pierre Paulin lounges, and it was a very beautiful space. And essentially the audience became so much a part of the experience at that time that nobody was allowed to place their handbags or any of their coats or anything on the backs of the chairs, because the entire space from every single angle was a part of that experience for everybody else. And it's almost like an extreme version of the uncross your legs, which we hear at every single fashion show shouted at us by photographers when we're sitting there and
uncross your legs.
Uncross
your
legs. If you're on the front row, they go, uncross your legs, because your foot's in the shoe. Do you not remember that Dior Couture show that you went to, and your foot's in every picture because you sat in the front row?
That was intentional. I was working for Trickers.
It was like Raf's first couture show for Dior, and Nick went, and then every picture there's like a huge foot, and it's because he was sat like that. So that's why they did it, but you obviously weren't listening.
No, I wasn't.
Voila. So it's a part of that entirely 360 part of the show that is now shown to everybody.
Yeah,
so the audience is as much as a part of every fashion show image. We see Tim, Nicole, all the critics are in the background of every single image, and even certain brands will place celebrities in certain parts of the show so that they're a part of that fashion image, that fashion film.
They zoom on the accessories, they zoom on the bags and the shoes.
Yeah, I mean it's all.
So that's the basis of Plato's Atlantis, the McQueen show, wasn't it? That the cameras sort of followed the models down the runway and then swept and then followed the front row back up again the runway.
Yeah.
So these like sort of prying eyes were looking at the front row and broadcasting the front row out to the world.
Just for the sake of everyone here, so Plato's Atlantis, I'm sure you all know it was a McQueen show, and it was McQueen's last show, and we streamed it on SHOWstudio, and it was kind of the first big fashion stream that was really sort of, you did the creative direction for it, so it was really beautifully kind of masterminded. And what was interesting with that show is the stream became a part of the show because the cameras were very prominent on the runway, so they kind of moved like these robot arms. So it was very much kind of film in runway. It goes back to a lot of the themes that we discussed, and really super beautiful.
But I think that was a turning point in the industry because they could see the sorts of numbers. I mean, we suffered from it because 6 million people tried to come and watch it in 1 minute. So, we weren't really prepared for that, not knowing that Lady Gaga was doing the end track, and we actually were told it was going to be the Jungle Book, but that's another story. But was it Little Mermaid? One or two. It wasn't going to be Gaga. Anyway, so I think that was a turning point. So I think the fashion industry, the business part of it, hold on, wait a minute, we're getting through to 300 people here, or we're getting through to 6 million?
Yeah.
Wait a minute, there's something more exciting in the 6 million department. So I think that was a turning point. And since that wasn't so long ago, that was, 5 years ago?
It was...
9?
Yeah, 5 years. Yeah, 5 years ago.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
pretty much.
not so long ago in any case. And now sort of nearly 70% of all London shows are broadcast live, and the live broadcast of the show is becoming so important. It's meant that we can do our panels at SHOWstudio and review the shows live. But it is becoming an important part of it. Live broadcasting is, you're absolutely right, live broadcasting is something that is new, and is with things like Periscope something that is taking off.
I'm conscious of time, so it's a tricky question, but I was wondering, in light of the fact that we're going to see the 10 kind of the best entries from our Fashion Film Awards, the 10 finalists, what makes a great fashion film? Not everyone has to answer, but if anyone has a really good idea, they can shout it out. Gareth.
It was funny that you were saying about the films that I make with Ruth, about them not necessarily having a narrative. There isn't necessarily any sort of reasoning behind why they exist. It's kind of an emotional response to what you have in front of you. And I think that's Nick's point about not needing to apply a narrative to a fashion film, because the narrative should be driven by the clothes, is the perfect example of what a fashion film should be. It should be an emotional reaction for me to what is put in front of you, and that's kind of really all it needs to be, whether it's 15 seconds long or whether it's 5 minutes long. It needs to be something that connects emotionally with the intention behind the clothing that is there, and also behind what the designer or the filmmaker wants to kind of put across. And I think it can be very base, it can be very, doesn't need all these bells and whistles. It can just be, like Nick said, like a filmmaker, a light, and a model, and then the rest's gravy.
Your films are also incredibly rich and dense in layers of cultural nuances and ideas that go back towards parts of history and things that are not necessarily linear narrative.
I think that's something that's
almost like just a subliminal part of
it's
what
like
you
when
do.
me and Ruth talk, we don't talk about anything other than what we want to do and what we want to achieve. Yeah, that's your job, love. It's not my job. We don't really think. I mean, there's two schools of thought about people who think a lot about what they do and about people who kind of just react. And it's like I'm very conscious that it's kind of maybe not the best thing to admit to, but it's like sometimes the reactionary way of working, or just the immediacy of seeing something that's beautiful and going with it, is the thing that drives us forward, rather than, if you think about things too much, you can kind of like stilt that freedom. And I think film affords a certain freedom to me as a designer and Ruth as a filmmaker, and we allow each other a lot of freedom to work. And I think it's important to have no script. Sorry, that was a long point.
That was lovely.
Nick.
Give us your thoughts, because obviously you and Gareth were on the judging panel. So what makes a great fashion film, and just briefly, what made these 10 kind of stand out to you? Because they're super different, as everyone's about to see.
Absolutely. Well, I wanted to sort of quote Ruth, really, because I just remember somebody asking her that when I was with her, and she said very quickly, "Oh, great fashion. It's a great fashion film." And I think, obviously, in Gareth's case, that's true. But conversely, a lot of the films that we're going to see tonight were made without access to great fashion. Not all of them, because some of them could have. But what I could see when I was going through the films, I could almost tell from the first frame of each film whether it was going to be good or not.
Yeah.
Although I did sit through nearly 600 from beginning to end, which was fantastic. But you could tell it. So it is in part great fashion makes a great fashion film. It's also a great fashion eye.
Yeah.
And I could tell if it was just somebody putting on a white shirt. And there was one film, sadly it's not in our 10, but was one film which was made by a young filmmaker from Jakarta, I think. It was a beautiful man, and he was a martial arts expert. And throughout the film, he just put on a white shirt. And it was just a normal white shirt. But you could tell that fashion filmmaker understood about elegance, understood about beauty, understood about fashion, understood about all those sorts of things. And part of the reason to go out and ask people across the world to do this, is to get those sort of people in. Although he probably didn't have access to Gareth's clothes or Nicolas Ghesquière's or whatever, you could just tell that he had that eye. So partly what makes a great fashion film, yes, is great fashion, but partly also a great fashion filmmaker, somebody who can see. I think it's the same thing what makes a great fashion photographer.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
We're going to have a very, very short break, and then we're going to see the 10 finalists. As we've kind of said a few times, what we were so excited about was how many people entered. You know, I think it was about 550 we got in, but one of the things that was super exciting was we actually received entries, and we did count, from 52 different countries, which was obviously completely amazing. Some of my favourites, we've got Alaska, Hawaii, Slovakia, Mexico, the Philippines, Egypt. So it was really nice because it really did give us a sense of truly what was a kind of a global picture of what fashion film was and what's exciting within fashion. It wasn't just judged by Nick and Gareth, it was also judged by an amazing set of panellists. We had QIC's Director of Investment Management, Stuart Miller, also filmmaker Ruth Hogburn, who's got a lot of airtime tonight, amazing Daphne Guinness, who is here, and then obviously such a sort of visionary eye within fashion, Nicola Fulmichetti, who's Artistic Director of Diesel and the founder of Nico Panda. Just one thing to say before you see these 10 films, there is one winner out of them, and one thing that was super important to Nick and all of us at SHOWstudio when we were coming up with this idea for this prize was that we wanted it not just to be a kind of a celebration of a good film, but a way of championing and continuing to support someone who's engaging with this medium. So we wanted there to be a kind of real lasting prize, not just a kind of, well done, you're the winner. So what we've done is not only will they receive £10,000 to kind of create an amazing fashion film, they're also going to get mentoring from SHOWstudio and Nick. And they'll receive a red digital camera, an amazing Sigma lens, and then also they'll have a trip to Australia where they can kind of promote their film. So what we're hoping is that not only is this recognition, it's also a chance for them to kind of go the next step in kind of growing their career as a fashion filmmaker. But if you can just join me in giving our amazing set of panellists a round of applause.